Hi, and welcome to our Thursday quarantine chats. And I am absolutely 100% thrilled because I am joined today with the wonderful Heidi Gaiman. She is amazing. She's an author. She's a licensed social worker. She's a trauma therapist. She's just an all-around spectacular person. I love her devotions that she does on a podcast, and her books that she's written are fantastic and amazing. Heidi, welcome to, I don't know, the show, this thing.
Love it. I love it. We can pretend we're like Jimmy Fallon at home with his guests, Ryan and Heidi having a quarantine conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I need the screenshot of the band,
Ooh, right? Yeah, I like it. Our own jam in the background. I like it.
Yeah. So Heidi, if you can introduce yourself to the audience here.
Yeah, well, Ryan gave me such spectacular accolades, if you will. But I am a writer and an advocate for mental health. Especially my goal is to change the church for mental health and to honor the fact that God cares for us as whole people, mind, body, and spirit, that he cares about each part of us. And so you'll find me at HeidiGaiman.com every day, writing articles and blogs and doing mental health videos and podcasts and other resources. So, I work to kind of bridge that space that I think we don't have enough information for, that combines both the theology that God gives us so clearly in his word, and then also the psychology and sociology of life with our mental health and our relationships.
Awesome. Yeah. Again, like I said, I'm thrilled to have you here and talking about this. So what have you been up to during this kind of quarantine time, lockdown, whatever you kind of, I guess whatever state you're in,
right? Yeah.
Because we're Colorado's in the state of quote unquote reopening, which is not at all different than the stay-at-home order that we live in. It's just the only difference is maybe a few restaurants can open up and
sure.
So
yeah,
high restrictions. So
right. Well, there's part of my family, right?
Yeah. That's okay.
This is quarantine life right here.
Yeah.
This happens all the time, actually. Like my interviews on KFUO radio, or I'll be, trying to do a video of my own for Mental Health Mondays and things like that. I feel like that really, see, I have a little video bomber that really shows pretty well what my life in quarantine is like. I feel like, just like everyone else, I'm trying to hold all the pieces of my life in a very close circle right now. They usually overlap, but now they're like almost concentric circles on top of each other. And so trying to do my profession and hold my vocation and do the writing and do therapy and have meetings, as well as be head. I just had on my Instagram today, actually, as well as be the head chef and emotion manager of the household and, trying to, my husband's a pastor, and support him in doing his stuff, but also say, hey man, I need more help than, we're in this together. Let's keep aware of that. I early in quarantine, and it's still true, and I think we all have to be really honest to reflect on both the good and bad and hold them together. Nothing is so black and white that it's bad, and good. We let God make those decisions about good and evil and what's that. But for most of us right now, there's some great things like family time. It is off the charts, right? The amount of family time we're getting in is pretty awesome. Also, I had to cancel a bunch of stuff off my schedule, and that was a giant relief. I didn't know I would have that. I could take a minute to say, oh, okay, I'm not going to be able to do my normal schedule that was kind of getting to the place where it was not sustainable, Yeah. And I think that is true for a lot of people, feeling that weight lifted in some certain areas. However, then there's the other side of it where, there's a lot of family time. I love having them around. And they like having me around, but we have 6 people in about 1,000 square feet here, and that's a lot at all times. And we try to get outside as much as we can when it's nice, but it's 50 degrees and rainy today. there's no perfect way to do this right
Yeah.
now. And so being honest about that it's good and it's also a little hard, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a mixed bag. There's some things that I'm going to take out of this and learn. But there's going to be a lot of things that I'm going to be like, oh man, that that was not so good. The new discoveries in that regard. Like for example, like you were talking about, family time. My son, Maine, we're kind of like, oh no, no school, and schoolwork, the online learning has always been a challenge. But like he is happier than ever because even though he's such an extrovert, loves to see his friends, but he really also loves us. So I can tell, and we can kind of tell that he's like more joyful because he gets to spend basically all day with mom and dad, which is
Yeah.
great for him. Sometimes mom and dad also need a break, so.
Right. And that's one thing I would encourage people is to take the insights that you can pull from this experience, and also know that there's certain things you can leave behind. Like you can take some good stuff and then leave behind. I have a journal, and I really encouraged all my clients and the people I work with to write down the things we don't want to go back to. Like these are some ways we can set some boundaries for the future, like stuff we really like that quarantine has taught us.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's the things that we're like, wow, we've really missed that. That was an important part of our life. And we want to engage even further maybe in some of those areas. And so that's one way that I kind of process it. And I think that list is changing and evolving. And some of the things were really clear. Like one of my kids was like, yeah, I don't think I want to do soccer. Like I thought that was really cool and fun. And now that I don't have it, I'm like, oh, it's kind of nice to watch just a little more TV and just play outside, Yeah. And so that was surprising, but it was pretty clear to her. Whereas other things I had written down, like we'd like to have dinner together in a leisurely fashion. Like we usually kind of eat together. We at least have that going, but like more leisurely dinners in our life was one thing we wrote down. But how to make that happen is a whole nother thing. Our schedules will get back to normal at some point. And so just kind of wrestling, this is a time. And I do think the quarantine and staying at home will be longer than we think. And it's really uncertain, I think. And so allowing that to take shape over time and to process it together, write some things down. Nothing needs to be set in stone. I think we've all learned in quarantine that we need a little more flexibility anyway in our lives. We need to be able to say, hey, this isn't working. How about if we change this thing up over here? Whether that's like how we emotionally connect around the table for family dinner, or whether that's about our schedules or the way we interact with our church on Sundays. I think people learning that maybe once a week on Sundays of worshiping together isn't quite enough community. Yeah. Maybe they'd like a little bit more. So I think it's complicated, but just giving yourself time to process and grab the insights where you can, because there's nothing truer about change than it will stretch and it will grow you. And this is a place that we all find ourselves in that is change whether we like it or not. Usually we're voting on change, like at churches or our companies or whatever, like what? And we have the ability to be like, I don't think I'd like change. Thank you.
So it's kind of like, I think of it as like a rubber band that flexes and grows and it changes that shape where, I really like that insight that you made and I didn't think about it in that way, where change was almost like an instance or an event. And then you just have to deal with it rather than to say, I really liked how you said, make those decisions of what you want to grow into and change in your life, but also know that you can kind of shift them around,
Right.
Because, this idea of like, okay, we're going to do this as a family now, and then we're going to do this, and I'm going to do this as a pastor. And then all of a sudden I'm like going, I don't know if I like doing that, I started putting out a whole bunch of content online, and I was like, because I'm a techie, I like this kind of content. And then I'm like, wait, I don't know if I like doing all of that.
Mhm.
much of it. And so now, I'm reevaluating that. So,
Mhm.
well, that's cool. I like
Yeah,
that.
giving some permission. So one thing I think too, and I think this is an important point, is that there is a certain amount of shame involved with the idea that we put ourselves in that there's right and a wrong way. And
Mm,
many, many things in life, especially when we know Jesus Christ, there's so much freedom in.
yeah.
And so just because you need to switch it up, just because you're like, you know what, that was a lot of content. I don't need to put out that much content,
Yeah.
doesn't make it wrong.
Yeah.
It just means we need to change it a little bit. Sometimes it is wrong, and we can say like, hey, that didn't work, we'll do something else.
Yeah.
But I think so often we put ourselves in those boxes, and then we're like, oh, I didn't do that right. And the fear of admitting that I didn't do that right keeps us from making some healthy growth in the change. Yeah.
Yeah.
And young adults, like I talk to them about this all the time, because how many of us stuck with our first major, like in college? I mean,
yeah.
right? And right? Yeah,
But I'm weird. I'm weird.
have
My
yet
wife
to
tells me
meet-
all the time.
You're the only
I'm
one,
unique.
right? Of course.
Yeah.
Look at you. That's impressive.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. But most of the time, I think we don't tell young adults enough. Like, it's
No,
okay to change your mind. And I mean,
Yeah.
because there's fiscal, responsibilities. There's all these things associated with that too. So it's really complicated. But it's okay in just different instances to be like, oh, we're going to do something different. That doesn't always mean it's right or wrong. And when it is, who cares? We have Jesus. Like, he covered all of that.
Yeah. And you can just let it go too. And to say. And I think that I like what you said in that, is that to say it's okay to change your mind. I mean, you probably know more than I do of so many young relationships that should have changed, should have couples that are dating should have just broken up like years ago or a year ago. And because they got embedded with that idea of like, this is the status quo, we can't change. And that's bad if we do, so to say, oh yeah, it's healthy to let these things go and almost say, well, what did I learn from that? What experience, what can I take out of that situation or that context to help me in the next situation, the next context? So I'm always like going, so what about the second pandemic that we're going to go through?
Right. What will that be?
Oh yeah, hopefully not. But yeah, I really like that. Speaking kind of about that change and looking forward, what are you seeing, in terms of like the church's impact in what I'm calling the COVID world right now, and potentially the post-COVID world, which will come at some time.
Will it? Tell me that. Call me each day and tell me.
Sometime. I don't know when.
It will.
It will.
No, that's good. And I think it's a really good point. And I think there is a back and forth in this. And so one thing I see is the church that is generally a little bit reticent toward change, right? That's not usually we have a low risk tolerance. And so change is difficult. And it's the church is a large system. You're talking about just a lot of people with a lot of history, and that's going to make it harder to change. It's harder to get a cruise ship going than to get a tiny rowboat. Like, that's the reality. And so I think that God does this in very different ways. And I'm not saying God sent COVID. Please don't misunderstand that. God doesn't send disease in order to deal with our stuff. That's not really the way it works anymore. See the Old Testament for that. But I think that he does use the stuff of life for sure. Like, he will not waste it. And I love that about him.
Yeah.
And so he will, I think, use these big things to show us a new way. And I just keep praying over the church that we will utilize that revelation, that he is able to bring us to a place that we weren't going, where he was trying to pull us and tug us for so long. Cultural engagement is always a difficult thing. It's a balance and a nuance of not becoming the culture, not becoming the world, if you will, but also entering into it. And I love in John when Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and come it to the full. But then he also says like the whole in the world, but not of the world thing. But he actually says, I've left you in the world with my word. Like, so it's not like, I think there's this tension in Christianity where we want to bubble ourselves up and have our nice little community. And the reality is that's not actually what we're called to. That's like a component of the larger thing. And so this has really, I think, forced us to, number one, focus on the external world. Like we are putting ourselves out there on the internet as the church and seeing the gospel being found in new ways. And so I hope that enlivens the church to be like, oh, that's really a space that God wanted us to be in to begin with. You know?
Yeah.
So, but then also I think there is the tension of how to go about that, how to do it. I know, you and I have talked about how do we love our neighbor well when it looks so different. And so I think the church feels like because we don't, and we're using broad generalizations here, obviously. I think one thing is hard is because every context is different. You know, what it looks like for you in Colorado looks different for us in Nebraska. And so there's a lot of judgment from place to place because it's like, I think we're starting to see our government actually kind of work the way it's supposed to, where localities decide things instead of like the federal government making big decisions. But we're not really kind of used to that process as maybe not as engaged citizens as we need to be and all of that. And so we can learn that context matters, first of all, and that we can engage in our context that God has given us and look around us and actually see the faces of our neighbors instead of looking for what the other guy is doing on the internet. So I think you have to hold those things together, both kind of the big idea of getting the gospel out there to the world and just our local, how do I help my neighbor next door? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. I really like how you said that because there's that tension, but it's so hard when all we have now is looking on the internet. And it's hard then to connect personally with someone that you may have no idea about. So like just for my situation and example, I have to say I've been really impressed with our governor. Our governor, he's one of the few ones that's reopening just very slowly.
Yes.
But what he did was he gave charge to the counties to say, so he said, we're going to reopen at this point, but then the counties started saying, no, we're going to stay closed for another week or two because our county is being hit. But maybe like 4 or 5 counties down the road, up in the mountains or in the plains is not being hit very bad. So maybe they can reopen and do some more things a little bit. But in the same thing with the pastors, I got so frustrated when I would go on Facebook and I see the pastors, we have closed groups of pastors and they're all like saying this or that about, I can't believe this is happening. This church shouldn't be doing that. And then I realized their context may be very different than what I'm experiencing, because I had some pastors like, why is everyone making a big deal? And this was obviously early on because their community wasn't impacted at all by this.
Right.
And I'm like going, well, where the city I'm living in, had, when it first came out, we had like 3 individuals, and now it's expanded, of course, but yeah, I think there's that tension of saying, how do we navigate this? But I really like how you said that Jesus gives us his word. And that's kind of our guiding comfort. I just did a study on, Psalm 23, that, your rod and your staff, they comfort me, that Jesus is with us during all of this mess. And we can rely on that and take comfort in that, even when we mess up and just say, oh, okay, I totally, that one was not a good decision. So,
right.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, and we tend to, again, take those those things on as shame. Like if we can't figure it out immediately, what we're supposed to do in this circumstance, then we feel like we've done something wrong. And honestly, I think even as Christians, and this is not necessarily healthy because when we read the word, we know that it's absolutely not true, but it's very natural to be like, God's mad at me. And we then put that into our other relationships and things, and we feel like our family is going to be upset with us. There is so much less pressure from God than we think, and our relationships should reflect that, especially within the Christian church and in Christian families, that my husband and I live within kind of expectations of each other. But our primary things that we do for each other is to hold a safe space, to just try to figure life out. I was just reading last month the book Love Lives Here by Maria Goff, who's Bob Goff's wife. And it was a good book, but one thing she says in there is like, we finally got to the place where we stopped treating marriage like a project and just kind of started to get to know each other. And that's not a direct quote. But like that gave words to something I had been researching a lot. What is the real purpose of relationship? And I really believe it comes down to these two things, safety and knowing. And so trying to experience that's what God gives us in perfection, right? Like he gives us an absolute safe space to be ourselves, like we're covered in Jesus' love from the cross and his resurrection. And so this is all wrapped in grace, right? That's going to be imperfect in my marriage, in my church family, in my friendships. But, we want to get to that space. That also then reflects love to my neighbor. So how can I bring to my neighbor safe spaces when maybe that's not what they have in their family? How do I do that? Through technology, by inviting them in and by, maybe dropping some stuff on their front porch, or by keeping the relationship going after all of this. There's so many, I think, nuances to that, but I think that helps clarify for us a little bit, like what is our task in this is really relational. And I think the church can move forward with a better understanding of the place of relationships in the church, because we've been in absence of that. When we can't gather together, the fake relationship is taken off the table, right?
Yeah, it's shifted, it's sifted, it's left behind in a sense.
Yeah, right. And I really pray, again, like I'm always praying over these kinds of things. I see the church doing so well at trying to connect to their people, and the people trying to connect to one another, and that real desire of like, maybe you're an introvert, maybe you're an extrovert. I just did an episode with KFUO on this, and we can put a link in the notes. But like the fact that it doesn't really matter, because right now we're learning that we're all a little bit of both. Like it's all on a spectrum, and that's kind of the way Myers-Briggs and all of those psychologists intended it. And so to identify that we all at the base need people, like we were created for people, and we're created for relationships. And how have we as the church, what are we doing well in that? But what can we be doing better? How can we connect better to people? And I see people asking those questions. And so I really hope that impacts us long-term, that we let that soak in a little bit.
Yeah, I like that idea, because I've been asking myself, now that I'm kind of on the other side of Easter, so to speak, where for me, and I don't know if it was like for your husband or at least other pastors, it was like a mad scramble just to get to Easter. And figure out how we're going to do Easter, because then it dawned on at least me rather quickly, like we're not going to be able to gather and worship for Easter, and so but now I'm just like asking the question, how then do I lead a congregation in distance? How do I lead people and help them to love each other in distance? And it's going to look different for each individual based on how they're making those decisions. Like for us, we did have one friend of ours who had COVID, and luckily, and she had a young daughter, but luckily her daughter was being taken care of, and she wasn't alone, because we were like, if she's by herself, we can take her into the household.
That's good.
We can, we'll take that risk,
awesome.
Because we want to care for both of you guys. So, thankfully, praise the Lord that she didn't have to go to the hospital. She recovered, but she did say it was like the worst thing that has ever happened.
Yeah.
It's the most painful experience. But I mean, remember, we stocked up because I think in January we started hearing those things, and both my wife and I decided just to purchase more food already and Gatorade just in case. And so we had all this food, and we gave some to Colleen's mom just help her out. And then when we heard that this friend of ours was getting sick and they needed some Gatorade because when she recovered, the taste of water, she could taste almost the metals in the water.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that.
Where you're discovering in this COVID stuff. So we're like, all right, those boxes of Gatorade that we have sitting around that, in case one of us gets sick, let's go have a box, have two, So, but it's that, it's weird because it's not in this expected personal, very close physical kind of relationship that we're used to, but it's still trying to help our neighbor. And I like how you said that, we kind of have to be a little bit creative. This is forcing a lot of pastors, a lot of churches, a lot of people to be very creative in their fields of work. And I think we were talking pre-show about this, about how this is allowing or forcing spontaneity to happen.
Yeah. Well, and so I think honoring that, and Brene Brown says this in Daring Greatly, that vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity and innovation. And I think the church is such a great breeding ground for this, because we can be the most vulnerable because we have Jesus. Because I have Christ in my life, like I don't have to armor up, like I don't have to protect because my identity is secure, like I know who I am in Christ. I can reach out and do something for you, be someone for you that you need in such a way without like losing my own needs, without, boundaries are important and stuff. But there can be more spontaneous. I can't say that word. Spontaneity. There we go. Got it. It was gone for a minute, but I got back. But we can have that because you were just talking about like the little girl, like we can have a different risk tolerance because we have Christ in our life, because, we don't, fear death and, not to be over dramatic, but that's a reality. But then also I don't even fear the possible like disconnection or the person saying like, no, thank you, because my job is to offer and to connect and to be vulnerable. And I let God fill in, the gaps. And so it's just a really important place to be. And so we can be more spontaneous. We can be more creative. And one thing I think is, the history and traditions of the church are important and good. And there's a reason we do different things that we do in worship and things like that. And that needs to be coupled with the now and the here and what people need and eye to the future. Those are both important things. And so I think people react with a little bit of fear to spontaneity and to the creativity of the church because we're afraid that we'll lose the things that are foundational, that are solid. But when we have the word, like we just talked about, those solid foundations are there. So we always look back to it. We check our ideas and stuff, but we can be vulnerable and even say something. I mean, imagine, Ryan, if I said something and then it was wrong, like it was just theologically off base. And like, I was like, whoa, we can't baptize people, whatever, like we're giving up baptism. Okay. I would not say that, but if someone did, and they were vulnerable enough to say it, we don't have to have judgment in that space because we have the word to say, oh no, God says something else. So that's something we're going to keep. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think there's a vulnerability and the ability to be creative, to brainstorm. And I see a lot of that. And I just want to feel like, good job, pastors, good job, people that are, I think we need to honor the vulnerability in creativity. And you're going to get flack from people sometimes, you're going to hear from someone who doesn't like what you're doing. But those are all good things of God, and that wrestling of the body of Christ and being able to figure out like, what is the right thing? Is there a right path here? Or can we have some freedom? That also is good wrestling. When I wrote Mighty and Mysterious, which is my study of Colossians, that's one thing I worked really hard to uncover is the places that God reveals and the things that God reveals, but then the things that he leaves as a mystery for us to kind of uncover, and there's so much freedom in that. And so I think that I understand it's vulnerable, but keep doing it, church, because it's such a good thing.
Well, I like that vulnerability, but it feels more like a discovery too.
Ooh.
So we're kind of like, for me, it's like, okay, what can I discover about my church, my community that we didn't know about ourselves before?
Ooh, I like that.
Maybe in that discovery, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. And we're going to need to be okay with making those mistakes and to say, well, mistakes were made, that's okay, and here's what we learned from it. Here's what we discovered about those mistakes, and to have that safe place to explore then, well, how do we then care for each other? How do we love God, love our neighbors, love our community? How do we do that in this way? And as we go forth, maybe it just doesn't pan out. And say, that's okay. What did we learn? And pivot. So, I feel like it's been the year of pivoting is 2020, just keep on moving, pivot down. And when you feel like you found a good spot, then you're going to have to pivot again sooner or later.
Yeah. Well, and it's like when you exercise, like, it's funny because I picture you like pivoting around or whatever, like doing that exercise will get us to a place where we're stronger. We're able to then pivot more and better because we went through that strength training almost, it is almost like that's what we're all going through, like both mentally and physically and everything now. It's just, everything's really different. And so that will, anytime we're kind of caught off guard or have to engage in the unexpected, that's really good for our minds and for our spirits. Like, we see spiritual growth, we see mental health growth. It's a good thing, even though right now I know everybody, it feels like it's not such a good thing most of the time.
Yeah. Well, I want you to talk about that because, I mean, you are a social worker, you're a trauma therapist, and I want to talk more about those safe places, especially for people that now don't necessarily, they're safe places now, they're home, and maybe it was before, but now it's not because, people are getting on edge with each other. As a mental health person, what can you speak to in terms of for our own mental health, what we're experiencing right now?
Yeah. I think this is giving us a new space for some emotional intelligence work, if you will. So I get a lot of questions about, like, what do we do about the anxiety of COVID? What do we do about this? And the one thing I keep telling people is, so anything we're experiencing now was likely already there. It's just really coming up for us now and coming out for us now. And we're not able to like manage it in the way we were before, which is actually a good thing, because I think so often when we're managing ourselves, that's not a healthy self space to be in. We want to discover, like we were just talking about, we don't want to just be managing. And so it's really helpful to get into a place. And there's a video I'm going to do on Tuesday with Michelle Dierks, who's from Peace in His Presence podcast. And we're going to do a live video on Facebook about big emotion. So this is like a term I'm trying to use for people to help them understand like what they're experiencing now, where emotions start to kind of fill the room instead of be these little things we experience internally. And that's what life change and circumstances and that upending of kind of our safety in life does, is it makes everything a little bigger and pour out of us, if you will. It's the overflowing cup in a way we don't really love. But anything overflowing that's out here, I can actually deal with now. I can start to begin to look at it and piece it out. And so we're going to kind of talk about some tips specifically for the emotions in a house and things there. And we can also, if people can't join us live on Tuesday and are watching this after all of that, we can put a link for the archive.
Okay. Yeah. And I'll see if I can get a link for that so that they can chime in, because I will. That sounds really fascinating.
And the basic idea too of emotional intelligence, and in particular in churches, I think we tend to either be really cozy with emotion because certain denominations feel like it's like a really great experience of God, whereas other denominations are like really reticent of emotion because they are so unpredictable. And when we follow them, that's always not, emotions are informants. I like to tell people, not leaders. So we let them inform us. So when I'm experiencing an emotion and it comes up, I have a 9-year-old who's on the autism spectrum and just really struggles with that. You don't do school at home. That is not what you do. And we did actually used to homeschool. So I'm like, this should actually work in your wheelhouse, but not in the way it currently is. Right.
Yeah.
And so he's like, it doesn't work with his neurodiverse brain. And so just really trying to be flexible with that. But my big emotion comes up of, hey, it's 9 p.m. I'm really tired. There is no way we can still be doing school, And so I'm angry, and I have to be honest with myself in order to deal with it in a healthy way instead of let it just either pile up. There's words for that I can't say on this broadcast. But when we try to shove it down, it piles up and then we're waiting in it, right? That's not good emotion. Or I can't shoot it out at him. I can't weaponize my emotion. Instead, the goal is name it, call it what it is, let it inform you, don't let it lead you. And so just being able to say, hey, I'm really kind of hacked off right now about this. I don't have to say those words to my 9-year-old. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I have to enter into an honest space, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times I don't have to say it. Just even internally naming it, going into the restroom, taking 5 seconds for myself to take some breaths and say, okay, Heidi, you're angry. Hello, anger. We haven't seen each other for a few hours. Let's have a conversation. But, just naming it, calling it what it is, asking God for help with it. He invites us to do that in the Psalms and all over Scripture. And that is a good thing. It's a good thing. And so we cannot deal with the things that we aren't aware of or that we're not willing to recognize, and so I think we're all seeing things about ourselves we don't like right now. That doesn't feel safe. Maybe the people around us aren't safe for us and the people in our house aren't safe for us. And so just being able to find a space for yourself, whatever that looks like I said, I favor my bathroom.
well, kind of going along that, I think this, for me at least, is also trying to create healthy habits too, in dealing with maybe sometimes feeling overwhelmed, and so you'll probably appreciate this, for someone lent us a 1,000-piece puzzle, and it was all these covers of comic books. So I'm a big comic book nerd, and so Holy Week was very stressful. And I completed that in 3 days, 4 days, nights, in the evenings. 1,000. It was quite a challenge, but it was. But Colleen was talking about. Now, my wife always picks up things way ahead before I even realize them about myself, and that's a blessing that I have, because she's like, "Hey, have you thought about this?" Because she was like, "I noticed that you were, that was kind of like your zone where you could process things and you were kind of a little bit more relaxed after doing those things." And like, yeah, maybe I need to do something just kind of calming with my mind when I'm feeling overwhelmed, and make that not necessarily the number one priority, but make that a priority or a habit when I'm feeling overwhelmed, so that I can get back to that's, for internal safe space within myself.
Right.
Then.
That's a great insight too, Ryan, that we have that internal safety that we need to find for ourselves, like where and when and how does that happen for us? Certainly with those of us who know Jesus, that he's a real part of our lives, that there's going to be a piece of that. But then there's parts that aren't about that he still cares about. You can do the puzzle. You can take those moments for yourself. And then also, who are those external relationships that also give you safety? You need both those parts.
Yeah.
And I would say to people right now, especially, some of the people in your house, if they generally just aren't safe, it's more important than ever, to use the domestic violence hotline, to use what you need to get to safety. So that's really important. But then also, if maybe they're just not quite safe in the way that they normally would be, because we're all like up in each other's business and stuff right now, and it's hard, and we're all like kind of emotional, and it's just kind of weirder than normal. Then look around for what you need. Is it because your family cannot bear the weight of all of your friendship needs, but you can't gather with your friends, then maybe it's time to reach out on FaceTime to somebody, or to look and spend some time texting with a friend. And then the same thing, like if you are a person who normally has felt like you haven't needed a lot of connection, and so maybe you don't have those foundational connections, but you're kind of noticing it now because no connection is really available. Like we're not even getting in like the same kind of conversation we might have with the grocery store checker and stuff. Then reach out, maybe it is time to just know what you need internally, but also who do you need externally? Who are the safe people? And you don't have to have a lot of them, but I would say that all of us need at least to be able to identify 3 people we can connect with in whatever way we need to right now, to say, hey, not doing great, and that will serve us well long term too. That's something we've always needed, but I don't think we've all done real well. So now's the time to recognize it and be like, okay, I got my 3. I got people.
Yeah, and those would be like safe people that you can say. I would say like you can just say almost anything to them, right? That even the scary things, that they would not in a sense like freak out and be like, oh my goodness, I can't talk to you anymore. But be like, okay, tell me more. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we need I'm talking middle of the night, 3 a.m. friends is what I like to call them. Like they're those people that are going to answer the phone and aren't going to, go off on you because you called them at 3 a.m. Like we need those people. And if you don't currently have those people, like I know that it's a hard place to recognize, I think. And again, vulnerable to say, gosh, I don't have 3 a.m. friends, or I only have 1, but it takes some time to develop those relationships. But to be able to find places of non-judgment, worth the effort, to move into some of those spaces.
Yeah. And this is a great opportunity to do that,
It is.
Connection.
And I think people are more responsive in many ways because they also didn't realize, they also, I think we're at kind of a even mental health playing field here that we didn't have sometimes before. Like so many of us were kind of like able to hide like our stuff. And I really think the one thing pandemic does for us is we all recognize that the world is hard. And some hard stuff is going to come into our lives and surround our lives. Some other hard stuff is going to come out of us. And so it just really makes it an even playing field for, hey, here is some of my junk. I'm willing to hear and walk through and discover, like you said, some of yours. That's a good space for relationship to be awkward, Yeah. Definitely awkward. But wow, that again, awkwardness and all of that good stuff is where creativity and that the real authenticity of relationship begins. That's good.
Well, and it's a process too. So it helps filter those things out of those feelings. Amazing. Oh, boy, I'm trying to get back to my notes here because there's so many things that I'm taking notes on from you speaking. I wanted you to talk a little bit about you have done a podcast, which I really love. I love My Shepherd. Last year, it's kind of gone through a rebranding now to Life in Relationship. And can you talk more about that transition and what you're doing now in that podcast?
Yeah, so it's so interesting because my ministry or my life's work, if you want to call it, I feel like whatever realm you're in, that whatever lingo you kind of use to understand what God has given you to do for these seasons that we are here, this short time. I really originally started working with pastors' wives and ministry families, and I still love that work. And that's an important part of, who I feel like I've been called to make a difference in their lives for mental health. But it became pretty clear to me as I started blogging on my website and I started reaching out as a therapist and then writing more with my books, Altogether Beautiful, My Name Mysterious, and doing some more work in that realm, just that God was calling me to have a voice to try to change mental health and authentic relationships within the church at large. And that was one way I could serve the ministry families that had been entrusted to me, I feel like from God. But that there was some broader work to do in that. And so as I started, I think, like we said, there's so much about discovery and how God works. I was discovering the arena that he was inviting me to speak in and to really have a voice for people, for mental health in particular in the church. And so I think a huge part of mental health and life itself is healthy relationships and healthy connection. And so in everything you'll read from me, it will always, always have that lens of like how God works through mental health and through relationships, that he cares about our mind, our bodies, and our spirits, all of those spaces inside of us. And really, really, just that's how he does his work, is through people. And so life in relationship, the goal was to bring both my voice, but then the voice of different experts and different friends, like yourself. I haven't gotten you on there, Ryan, so you owe me one right now.
Okay, I do.
You owe me one, but Colleen has been on there. And those voices we want to capture, because it's like relationships in real time in the podcast. You know, that way you get, I feel like when I am podcasting, I'm in relationship with the listener. It's, even though, you know, it's not a conversation, it feels like it is, because there's a lot of wraparound and people come, and I feel like they can come back and give me their insights, like when they've listened, and I really value that. And so the whole goal is to just help inform mental health and genuine relationships with hope in Jesus. Mental health and genuine relationships with hope in Jesus. And so that kind of clarified from, you know, I Love My Shepherd was really awesome. I think we did a lot of the same stuff when it was called that. But what happened was, number one, when people searched it, they got German Shepherds. Like, it was just an unsearchable name with SEO. Like that, I just couldn't beat it. I gave up. Yeah. So that's kind of the funny end of it. But at the same time, just really clarifying that, what does Heidi Gaiman talk about? She talks about mental health, relationships with hope in Jesus. So.
Yeah, and you know, I've listened to I Love My Shepherd was my devotional that I listened to.
That's awesome.
And I feel like it didn't. I don't want to say it changed into something different with life and relationship. It kind of the best way I would say it would be like metamorphosized, something similar. But different in a way.
Like,
it's a kind of like a beautiful butterfly. Not that it was a caterpillar before, but
right. But you know, you're right. I think and we all. I mean, I think that's how life works. I mean, that's what we're talking about with this quarantine and everything else. You know, like, what is God doing through this? Like, things become a different version of the same thing, and hopefully we're all on that growth trajectory in life, you know. And so podcasts, same thing. They have to grow. They have to develop into what they are. So
we have to pivot, right?
There we go. Right. Exactly. I thought it would be one thing. It wasn't. It's another thing.
And you mentioned to me, you had, I think last year, Mighty and Mysterious just came out. And then, and you're working on another book as well. Can you talk about both Mighty and Mysterious and then your new project?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Mighty and Mysterious originally started, I was writing about Genesis because of what we're talking about. Like, I really feel like people need a better foundation for what relationship is. And so again, in my writings, you'll always read about Genesis 1, 2, and 3. It's a huge foundation for me and how we understand what relationships are in life. So I started writing on that. And then God just kept turning the page to Colossians. And so I was really reticent. Colossians has a lot, though, about the creator, who is God as creator, and why that matters, and God as savior. And so I kept getting really intrigued in this. And I really feel like we do have a little bit of a lack of understanding of creation and what that is, and that personhood of God as creator. So I just kept reading Colossians. Well, then the thing about Colossians is it's so fascinating because it's also about the community that is the church, which I don't think there could be a more relevant time for that than right now. Good job, God, right? Who knew we'd have like this pandemic, and just really need to reframe what is community in the body of Christ. And so Colossians has just so much vibrancy in that, like what is community? And so as I turned, this idea of creator and then also connector became really real for me. So Mighty and Mysterious is really about God as creator and connector of all things. And so he connects, everything inside of me internally, like we said, mind, body, spirit, but he also connects us as people in this world, in relationship and in the body of Christ. And it's really cool to just sit in that of who he is and what he's doing. It's certainly a little bit of I hate to call it a gray zone because then we get into Star Wars. But it is this place. So Mighty Mysterious, you'll read a lot about dualities. And what we talked about at the beginning of this video chat, that we have to hold a lot of things together. And how does God invite us to sit in both the mystery but also the revelation of who he is and who Christ is in our life. And, we live in a lot of dualities, law and gospel. We live in justice and love, truth and love, all those things. And so really uncovers getting a little cozy with the stuff that's not quite clear. So I just invite everybody to, dive into that one. And then right now I'm writing a manuscript that isn't, so all that has been published by me so far is, in a Bible study format. There's a workbook. You can do some videos with it and buy those separately. You don't have to. It's kind of designed to be really flexible that way. But that's my traditional writing, is to look at a book of the Bible and be able to grab some insights from that. So this is actually a nonfiction text that my goal was to help people better define brokenness and hope, and how those things work together. And again, sit together. Like I don't think there is such a thing as hope without brokenness. And that is really a beautiful truth of God, I think, although it's a little bit of an uncomfortable one. And so I hope this text allows people to sit down, with a cup of coffee and open the book and dive in and just really process and discover some things about who God is and what he's done for us. And the beauty of, mental health, I think, really makes us aware that brokenness isn't always about what I do and what I do wrong. It's about just the existence that this whole world is hurting. And Jesus Christ came to heal and to care and to give it hope. And so I hope it also is a place then that reflects non-judgment to people, because brokenness isn't always about what we do wrong and that we're messed up people. The whole world cries out, all of creation cries out for him. And so that's the new text I'm working on, and that should come out next April 2021. Whoa, that just feels like a million worlds away, but April 2021, look for the next book.
Oh, awesome. Well, I can't wait to see that. That sounds amazing. So
That's right.
Cool. Wow. Boy, we covered a lot. This is
we did. This was like a meaty chat, which
yes, it was.
My favorite, so.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Heidi, for being here and talking to me, and I know this will be a benefit for many people. I always like my guests to be kind of say the last word, so to speak, to wrap things up for us and say the last word and give the last message to our audience.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking this time to listen. If you've gotten to this place in the video, well done. Thanks for joining our meeting.
You win.
Yes, right. There's no prize, but good job.
Yeah.
I just really encourage all of the viewers and the listeners to know that God is working in our heart, soul, mind, and strength, that he really is in all those places, and he connects each of those things internally for us, and he also is connecting us in ways that we can't see all around us. And so be encouraged that God is who he says he is, and that he is at work in whatever your mental health and your relationships look like right now, and turn to him, and he will give clarity in those areas, and go forth in the strength of God, knowing that none of us are perfect, and all of that stuff is really messy, but it's a really good thing of God, and he brings hope into it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Heidi, for joining me. Such a pleasure, as always, to hear your voice and actually to talk to you this time.
It's really awesome. I love
Actually
it.
on the other end of my, earbuds. So, but yes, but thank you very much. I hope you all have a blessed day and blessed week. Thanks.